Good morning and happy Sabbath to everyone. When I realized that Pastor Steve was probably not going to be able to preach, I did volunteer, but so did Ron. And I guess I got the privilege of speaking today because Ron speaks next week. And because of things happening this week in my life, I didn't have a whole lot of time to put something together. And knowing that Ron was going to be speaking next week on a Christmas theme, and I know the title of his sermon, but I won't tell you. I'm going to keep you in suspense. So I went back to one of my favorite stories in the Bible. You know, we can always go back to the stories in the Scriptures and learn something new each time. So that's what I want to do today, is relate the story of Elijah and draw some lessons from it. And hopefully you may learn something that you hadn't known before or got a blessing out of it in a different way than you had before. So I invite you to take your Bibles and turn to 1 Kings chapter 17. The story goes over to chapter 17, 18, and 19, and we'll be looking at that story today as we come before the Lord. And like I say, just listen and maybe you'll find a blessing that you hadn't had before. And that's my prayer, is that we will all get a blessing today as we worship God on His holy Sabbath day. So chapter 17 starts out talking about Elijah the Tishbite. He's an inhabitant of Gilgal, and God comes to him and says, I want you to go to Ahab, and I've got a message for him. Now Elijah had been seeing the apostasy in Israel, and it really bothered him, and he wanted something done about it. And all of a sudden God says, well, I'm choosing you to be the one to do something about it. How many of us would have been willing to do that if God came to us and said, hey, I'm choosing you to do it? Sometimes we're a little hesitant to do what God wants us to do, but not Elijah. He's bold. He's only bold because he had faith in God. So he goes down to Jezreel and he walks into the throne room of Ahab. How he got in there without being stopped by the guards is another thing. You know, they didn't have the Secret Service in those days, but they did have guards. And they would have stopped this hippie-looking guy from the hills just coming into the throne room. But he comes in and he stands before Ahab and he makes this proclamation. He says, by the Lord God of whom I serve, there will not be rain until I say it will rain again. Now, was that a little presumptuous on his part, saying it won't rain until I say it's going to rain? But you see, he could say that because he was living so close to God, he knew what God's will was, and God had told him to make this proclamation, and he went ahead and did it. And as Ahab sort of sat back in his throne, he said, who is this guy, and what does he mean? Elijah walked out, and nobody saw him. Interesting fact on this is at this time Israel was worshiping Baal, and Baal was the god that's supposed to control the heavens and control the rain and the dew. And so this was a direct assault against the idol of Baal, saying it wouldn't rain. And Ahab's wife Jezebel was the high priestess of Baal. So this was direct assault against the royal household. And Ahab sat back, he was shocked. And like I said before he could say anything, Elijah was gone. So then God spoke to Elijah and said, get up to the brook Cherith and be there. You can drink out of the water of the brook, and I'm going to tell the ravens to come, and they're going to drop bread to you, and they're going to drop meat to you in the morning and the evening. How many of you have seen a raven willingly give up some food to somebody else? They don't do that. They are stingy. But God says, I'm going to command the ravens that they will bring you food in the morning and in the evening. And so Elijah went up to the brook. Of course, Ahab now sent out all his soldiers looking for Elijah. He wanted to find this man because he wanted to put him to death. But Elijah was hid. God hid him. But after a while, because of the drought, because there was no rain, just like Elijah said, because of the drought, the brook dried up. Now Elijah must have thought, I wonder what I'm going to do now. You know, the ravens might still bring me food, but I got to have water to drink. But God says, okay, Elijah, now's the time to move on. I want you to go to the city of Zarephath, which was outside of Israel. And there's a widow woman there that I've commanded to feed you and to sustain you. So Elijah picked up his coat, put it on, and he started walking to Zarephath. As he got close to the city, he saw this woman out there gathering a few sticks of firewood. And the Lord impressed him that this is the woman that I'm sending you to. This is the widow. So Elijah says, hi there. Can you bring me a drink of water? The culture in the Far East is hospitality is most important. So immediately the woman says, yes, I'll go get you some water. And Elijah says, oh, wait a minute. I'm hungry. Can you bring me some food at the same time? Can you bring me a loaf of bread? Can you assuage my hunger because I'm hungry? And the face of the widow fell and she said, oh, my Lord, I have just a little bit of meal in the bottom of my container and just a few drops of oil. I'm out here gathering a few sticks to make a fire that I'm going to bake a small loaf of bread so that my son and I can share it, and then we will die because we have no more food in the house. And Elijah says, oh, I tell you what, you go ahead and make that little loaf of bread, but you bring it to me first. There again, is he being presumptuous? She has nothing except this little bit of food for her and her son. And Elijah says, bring it to me first. Serve me first. But then he makes a promise. He says, as long as the Lord lives, that flour will never fail and that oil will never go dry until the Lord sends rain back upon the earth. And this woman had so much faith that she did exactly what Elijah said. She went and she made that little piece of loaf of bread. She brought it to Elijah. Then she went back, and there's more flour in the bin. She looked, and there's more oil in the jar there. So she made some food for her and her son. And for several years, that flour never finished, and that oil never went dry, and she and Elijah and her son had plenty to eat. What a miracle that is. But then something sad happened. The widow's son got sick, and he died. And she turned to Elijah and said, oh, have you brought my remembrance of my sin upon me, that the Lord has taken my son from me? We don't know what her sin was. It may have just been in general that she knew she was a sinner, and God was punishing her by taking her son. And she said, how can the Lord do this to me? And Elijah says, well, give me your son. He takes her son up to his room, lays him on the bed, and lays down on top of the son 3 times and prays the Lord, please restore this son to his mother. And the Lord answered the prayer. And Elijah took the son and gave it back to his mother and said, see, the Lord has honored your request. He is blessing you because you have blessed me. See, when we bless others, when we share with others, God pours out his blessing upon us as well. I have been thinking about things in the past several weeks, and I have now included in my daily prayer that, Lord, please make me a blessing to somebody today. And if we all did that, God would put things in our path that we can be a blessing to others, and in turn, he will bless us. So after about 3.5 years after Elijah had been in Ahab's throne room, God came to him again and said, Elijah, it's time for you to go back and meet Ahab. I want you to go back and I want you to do what I've commanded you. He laid out a plan. So Elijah left Zarephath. He went back to the land of Israel. And as he was walking along, he saw a gentleman on horseback with some other people with him coming towards him. It was Obadiah, who was a captain in the house of Ahab. Obadiah and Ahab had gotten together that morning, and Ahab said, listen, Obadiah, we've got to find some water somewhere, or else we're not going to have any cattle left. We're not going to have any sustenance left. We've got to find some water. You go one way, and I'll go the other way, and we'll see if we can find water anywhere in the land here. And so Obadiah and Elijah met. And Obadiah recognized Elijah right away. And so he said, "Oh, how are you doing?" And Elijah said, "I want you to go to Ahab and tell him that I want to meet him." And Obadiah said, "Oh, no, don't do that to me. Ahab has been looking all over Israel and all over the nations around Israel trying to find you. And if I go and tell Ahab that I have found you, and he comes back here, and you are left because the Spirit of the Lord has moved you somewhere else that I don't know, he's going to kill me. I've been faithful to God. You know, I hid 100 prophets of the Lord in 2 different caves and fed them during these times of famine. I've tried to prove to God that I am a faithful servant of him, and now this is going to happen and Ahab will kill me. What does God have against me?" And Elijah says, "No, don't worry, Obadiah. You go tell Ahab that I want to meet him, and I will be here. I will not leave." So Obadiah goes and he finds Ahab and he says, "Hey, I found Elijah. Let's go. He says he wants to meet with you." Ahab probably scratched his head and said, "Yeah, I've heard that story before." But he must have believed him because he came with Obadiah and Elijah was still there. And what did Ahab say as soon as he saw Elijah? "Are you the one who troubles Israel? You're the troublemaker." And what did Elijah say? "Not me. You're the troublemaker because you have led the people to apostasy. You're the one who turned away from God. You are the one who's brought trouble in Israel." He was not going to allow Ahab to browbeat him at all. The king against this hick from the sticks. But he stood up because he knew he was on God's side. You know, many times people say God is on our side. No, we need to be on God's side. There's a big difference there. And so then that coward Ahab, this guy speaks with authority. And then Elijah gave him a command. Can you imagine this hippie-looking guy, this country bumpkin, talking to the king of Israel, and he tells him, "This is what you are going to do. You are going to send messages throughout the entire land of Israel. We want everybody to gather on Mount Carmel, and we are going to have a test to see who is the true God." And so what does Ahab do? He sends messengers out and says, "Everybody, we've got to go to Mount Carmel." Obviously, it took a few days for that to happen. We don't know the time period of that happened, but everybody started gathering around Mount Carmel. Now, as we get later in the story, we'll see there had to be a spring or a creek up there because people had to drink, and then later on we'll see how Elijah used the water. But they all gathered around Mount Carmel. And as they're all there, and I guess it sounds like it's fairly early in the morning, Elijah stands up and he says, "How long are you going to halt between 2 opinions? How long are you going to waffle between what is right and what is wrong? If Baal is God, serve him. But if the Lord is God, serve him." And this is how we're going to find out who is who. We're going to take 2 bullocks. The priest of Baal can have one, and I'll have one. They build an altar. They put wood on the altar. They kill the bullock and they cut him up and they put him on the altar. And I will do the same. And whoever's sacrifice is consumed by fire, then we'll know that that is the true God. The people said, "Well, that sounds fair. Let's do that." And so Elijah says, the prophets of Baal, 450 of them, plus another 400 on the groves, I'm going to let you go first since you got the bigger crowd. So they build an altar. They put the wood on it. They put the bullock on it. And Elijah said, "Oh, one more thing. You can't put the fire under it yourself. That fire has to come from your God. You cannot light the fire yourself." And I'll tell you, they looked for every way that they could think of to light a fire themselves, but Elijah was watching them very closely. So for hours, they danced around the altar, cried out to their god, Baal, "Send fire down on this sacrifice. Burn it up." And Elijah was watching them closely to make sure they didn't try to sneak in a bit of fire here. And around noon, when nothing had happened, Elijah starts mocking him. He says, "What's wrong with you, God? Cry louder to him. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's gone on a journey. Maybe he is just involved in something else. Maybe he had to use the bathroom." So they cry out even louder. And then they start cutting themselves with knives, trying to appease this god, this idol. And after a time, they were exhausted. They just didn't know anything else to do. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is the time of the evening sacrifice in the Jewish system of sacrifices, Elijah says, "That's enough. It's my turn now." So Elijah goes to where there's an old altar of God that has been broken down in disrepair, and he starts repairing it and building up this altar of the 12 stones. And he did this on his own. He didn't want an idolatrous hand to touch those stones. He wanted those stones to be pure, and he picked them up and he built an altar to God. Then he took the wood and he put the wood on the altar. Then he took the bullock, he killed it, he cut it up, he put the meat on the top of the altar. And then he cut a ditch all the way around, a pretty big ditch. And then he says something that just shocked the people. He says, "See those 4 barrels right there? Go fill those with water and pour it over the altar and the wood and the sacrifice." So they did. He said, "I still got room in that ditch. Take those 4 barrels, fill them up, and pour them over it again." And then he said, "Do it a 3rd time." 12 barrels of water had been poured over that altar. And so there's no way that it could thought that it would be lit by human hands. And so then he comes and he kneels down. And in chapter 18, verse 36, we read these words. "And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that the prophet came there and said, 'Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and that I've done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their backs to you again.'" And then what happened? Fire came down from heaven. It came down and it burnt up the wood on the altar. It burnt up the sacrifice. And then it burnt up the stones. And then it burnt up the water. And then it burnt the ground all around. And by the time it was done, there was just this big old crater where this altar had been. And the people saw this and they cried out, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." You see, when God has faithful servants who follow Him and do His will, He will honor them in miraculous and just enormous ways. The people of Israel saw that God was the true, powerful God, not Baal, because of what He had done at Elijah's request. And they declared, "The Lord, He is God." And then what did Elijah do? He says, "Take those prophets of Baal, those people that have led you astray, take them down to the brook and kill every one of them. Let none of them escape." And then he told Ahab, he says, "Go eat and drink, because I hear the sound of abundance of rain." It hadn't rained a drop yet. But he told Ahab to get ready because he knew it was going to rain. He had the faith that it would rain, and not just a little bit, but an abundance of rain. So then Elijah goes up to the top of the mountain. He kneels down, he puts his face between his knees, and he prays, says, "Lord, honor your servant. Send the rain." He tells his servant to go look out towards the sea, because this is right on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. The servant comes back and says, "Nothing. The sky is just totally clear of clouds." So Elijah prays again. He sends his servant, comes back again. No, there's no clouds. He does this 7 times. The servant comes back the 7th time. He says, "There's a little cloud out there, about the size of my hand. You know, if I put my hand up, I can almost block it out." And Elijah says, "That's it. The Lord's going to send rain." Ahab to get ready to run, to get his chariot ready to go back to Jezreel because it's going to rain. And as Ahab is driving down to the city, lightning flashes, and what does he see? He sees Elijah running ahead of him, making sure that he gets to the city safely. And they get down to the city. Elijah stays outside of the city while Ahab goes in. And then he tells Jezebel what had happened. Is Jezebel happy? These are her prophets and her priests that are killed. She sends a message out to Elijah. She somehow finds out where he is and sends a message to him. He says, let the gods do to me tomorrow what you've done to my priests today, if by tomorrow you are not like them. In other words, if I don't kill you by tomorrow, then let me be killed. What does Elijah do? He's seen the magnificent power of God. He's seen how God has worked miracles, how God has protected him. But a threat from one evil heathen woman, he loses his faith. He gets up and he runs, and he's leaving. He's fleeing for his life. He goes, and about a day's journey, he goes down to Bathsheba, and there he leaves his servant, and he goes on about another day's journey. And by this time, he's so exhausted, he lays down under a tree. The Bible calls it a broom tree. Some other versions call it a juniper tree, but a small stunted tree. He lays down and he goes to sleep because he has also told God, he says, I'm done. Why didn't you just let me die? I'm no better than my fathers. I've failed you. Just take my life. Let me die. Let's be done with it. And he goes to sleep. A little while later, somebody shakes him. He looks up and there's an angel. The angel says, rise, eat and drink. He looks and there's a fire with some food on it and a jar of water. The angel says, I've prepared this for you. Eat this. Wouldn't you like to eat a meal prepared by an angel? Wow. But you know what? You married men have done it because your wife has built. You see? But he looks at that and he eats. And such good food. It filled him up. He felt so good. Then what did he do? He did what most of our guys do if we get a good meal. Lay down, took a nap. So he lays down and he sleeps again. A little while later, the angel shakes him and he says, here, there's some food you need to eat because your journey is long. It's more than what you can handle on yourself. So he eats. And that food sustained him for 40 days and 40 nights as he went down into the wilderness, down to Mount Horeb, which is also the mountain of God, which is Mount Sinai. He gets down there and he climbs up the mountain and he finds a cave and he goes into the cave and he lays down and goes to sleep because he is totally exhausted. And while he's in there, he sleeps the night through, and then he hears God saying, wake up. He says, what are you doing here, Elijah? Why are you here? What's implied but not said, I think, is God is saying, Elijah, I told you to go to Ahab and you went. I told you to go to the brook Cherith and you went. I told you to go to the city of Zarephath to the widow and you went. I then told you to go meet with Ahab and you went. I told you to go to Mount Carmel and you went. I told you to run before Ahab to the city and you went. But I didn't tell you to come here. Ahab, why are you here? And Elijah, why are you here? And what was Elijah's response? He said, Lord, I've been so zealous for you. I have tried to tell everybody that you are the true God. I have done all sorts of things in your name. But now they're trying to kill me. And so I ran away. And God says, come out to the face of the mountain. Elijah comes out into the face of the mountain. And suddenly this great wind comes whistling through. Rocks start pummeling down. The mountain just is shaking with all this wind. It's just a tremendous storm. Elijah's scared for his life. He goes back into the cave. But then the wind stops. But the Lord wasn't in the wind. Elijah's saying, whoa, what's going to happen next? And suddenly the earth starts shaking. The earth is just shaking. And what rocks might not have been knocked down by the wind is now knocked down by this earthquake. I imagine he grabs a hold of the side of the cave and just holding on for dear life. Probably got knocked down. And he just doesn't know what's going to happen. Probably the stones in the cave are falling down around him. And then it stops. But the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. And as the dust settles and he's able to see out of the cave again, suddenly there's this tremendous lightning storm. You know, he'd seen fire come down from heaven on Mount Carmel, and that was a comfort to him, and he loved that. Now he's seeing this fire outside of his cave, and he's scared to death. On and on, this lightning flashes back and forth. The whole mountain seems to be on fire. Then finally it stops. God wasn't in the fire. Then he heard a still, small voice. Now, we're not told what that still, small voice was. But I'm thinking it's probably God speaking to him, saying something like this. Elijah, my son, why don't you trust me? I love you with an everlasting love. My love will never leave you. But you don't trust me enough. You ran away when I could have protected you. Come out to the face of the mountain again. Come out of your cave. As he comes out, God says to him one more time, Elijah, why are you here? And once again, Elijah tries to bring an excuse of why he's there. You know, God never debated with him when Elijah spoke. He let Elijah say his piece, and then he didn't debate it, didn't say that Elijah was wrong or right. But this time after Elijah says that, you know, everybody's deserted you except me. I'm the only one left. God doesn't respond to that right away. But what does he do? He tells Elijah, I got a job for you. See, I want you to go back into Samaria, and I want you to go and let's verse 15 on chapter 19. The Lord said to him, go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael king over Syria. So he wants to anoint a pagan king over a heathen nation, but he says, that's the man I want in that position, and you anoint him, and I will make it happen. Then he goes on, also, you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nishmam, as king over Israel. So Ahab is king now, but I want to tell you that I want somebody else to be king, and you're going to anoint them. And then he goes on and he wants to tell him that he's going to go to see Elisha, the son of Shaphat, and anoint him as the one who will take Elijah's place when his time on earth is done. And so Elijah recognizes he's got his marching orders. God tells him what he wants to do. Then God says, oh, by the way, you said you're the only one in Israel that remained faithful to me. But there are 7,000 people in Israel that did not bow the knee to Baal or kiss the idol. Over 7,000 people remained faithful, but you think you're the only one. So I think the lesson there is when God gives us a mission, we are to be concerned about that mission and that mission only. We're not to worry about other things. We're not to worry about anybody else. God could have chosen any one of those 7,000 to do what he asked Elijah to do, but he chose Elijah to do it, and Elijah should have done it without wondering about anybody else. And so it is, sometimes we are concerned about things that really don't bother us. But sometimes we are also like Elijah, that we are standing in that cave and the mountains are shaking, the wind is blowing, the lightning is flashing, and we may be crying, Lord, where are you? I need you. Where are you? And we don't hear him in that, but we can hear him in the still small voice. See, God has a plan for each one of us. God has a job for each one. No, I take that back. God has a mission for each one of us. There is something that we can do that God has planned for us that nobody else can do as well, because He has formed us for that specific mission. We need to be able to listen to God and to hear that still small voice. And what I encourage all of us to do today and each day is to pray for, to listen to, and to obey that still small voice that God will give to us as He tells us what His mission for us is.